So much fun to have my old neighbor, Rosie, on. She's doing this really beautiful work around, law enforcement, leadership, trauma-informed training. I don't know. It almost seems unnatural for someone in law enforcement to be doing these things.
That's what's so remarkable about Rosie and her story of coming up to the police department in the 80s as a gay woman, probably not a very friendly environment, although she doesn't dwell on that, admits that there were roadblocks thrown in her way, but she was determined in what she was doing. Her progression to become a police chief, which is amazing, but then also all sprinkled in with that during her time of teaching this trauma-informed leadership means to the people who she was working with, seeing that they didn't have the skills, that they weren't getting that, and then saying, I'm going to bring this. There's trauma, and if you don't deal with it, you try to push it down, it's going to come out and it's going to hurt somebody, including
Yeah.
yourself. Continuing to do it on a much
Yeah.
grander level, and a coach and a leader. She's a remarkable woman. It was wonderful
Yeah.
to speak with her.
Bringing the police officers into the community and bringing them into the schools, right?
Yes.
Kids are able to meet police officers and understand that they're real human beings. These are your friends, not your foes, right?
Yeah.
And so,
And then also for the police officer to see that these kids are just kids and not jump to conclusions or to escalate situations that do not need to be escalated with
yeah,
children.
she's giving us hope.
Yeah.
The world is a lot right now. Are you feeling it? We all need new tools to help us walk through the chaos with grace, ease, and compassion for each other and for ourselves. In this podcast, you'll hear from parents, educators, and other experts who can bring perspective to the monumental job of parenting. It's time to level up and be warriors for our kids and our communities. This is the Warrior Parent Podcast. I'm Marci Mitchell.
And I'm Debbie DiManno. As parents, we understand that it really does take a village to raise our kids. We hope that this podcast serves to create and support that community for you. Join us as we discuss and practice our core tools, which are proven mind-body techniques that can be used by anyone to improve your life on a daily basis.
Welcome back to the Warrior Parent Podcast. We are happy you're joining us. And today we're going to be speaking with Rosanne Richeal. Rosanne is an executive coach with a focus on leadership development and personal growth. She is the founder of Richeal Group, a leadership and executive coaching enterprise, an author of 4 leadership and personal growth books, and the host of Resurgent You, which is her podcast. She's provided coaching for executives, line and professional staff in public, private, and university settings across the nation. She's served in the fields of emergency medical services and as an emergency medical technician and in law enforcement for over 35 years. She retired as a chief deputy from a large sheriff's office in Northern California, and she has served as a chief of police. She's a senior consultant with the National Command and Staff College and a curator of wellness, trauma-informed leadership, executive leadership, and personal growth content for Magnus Works and NCSC. Her background includes a BA in criminal justice management and an MS in counseling psychology and marriage family therapy. So welcome, Rosanne. We are very happy to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here on your podcast.
Oh boy. So, okay, she just gave that intro and we've been speaking a little bit like, what will we actually focus on in this conversation? Because I think there's a million things that we could talk to Rosie about. And I'm going to call her Rosie just because, just a little background. I met Rosie 7 years ago or so. We were
Yes.
neighbors. I just fell in love with Rosie and we got to know each other. Rosie was just retired, I think, from law enforcement then, maybe
Yes.
newly
Yeah.
retired or trying to figure out if she was going to be retired. And then she was doing some leadership workshops. And at the time, Marci and I were trying to get up and running with our nonprofit organization, teaching tools. And in fact, Rosie, I don't know if you remember this, but you invited me to one of your workshops and I got to practice with some of your students using some of our tools. So I've just been inspired. I noticed Rosie, who continues to further education, just became a licensed marriage family therapist. And I'm super excited about her doing that work. So without further ado, Rosie, why don't you give us a little background maybe on, how you came to be in law enforcement, how you rose the ranks or rose to the top, how you retired and then tried to do a pivot, I guess a big pivot into a different life. There you
Sure. No,
go.
yeah. And thank you, Marci, for again inviting me on your podcast. Yeah, I sit there and I think about that whenever I think about my career, my life. For me, growing up, I always knew what I wanted to be. It was, where I ended up, where I am now is no surprise necessarily to me. There's four things I wanted to be as a kid. I wanted to be a paramedic, a police officer, a veterinarian, or a doctor.
Mm.
And when I graduated out of high school, I became an emergency medical technician. Put myself through school, worked on a private ambulance for 6 years. But in the midst of doing that, what I really wanted to be was a law enforcement officer. I wanted to be a cop, and more specifically, a canine handler. And so I put myself through what they call the Reserve Academy, because it was in the late 80s, and I'd been applying at different agencies, but there was budget cuts back then, and it was almost along the lines of, if you didn't know anybody,
Yeah.
you were
Yeah.
from the outside, you kind of had to struggle to get there. And so
Yes.
I tested for 4 years, test after test after test, and I discovered that I could put myself through a reserve academy, get on as a reserve police officer, which I did. And in the midst of doing that, I realized I could put myself through a full-time police academy. So in essence, I went through 2 police academies back to back.
Wow.
And during the time, I was working 4 jobs. So I was full-time as an emergency medical technician, working 24-hour shifts, Fridays and Sunday nights, going to the academy Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday evenings, and all day Saturday, and then working as an emergency dispatcher, reserve police officer, and a security officer at a local hospital.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
All
Wow.
trying
Okay.
to just pad
So,
my resume. I didn't know what to do.
and let's give some perspective to people. So you are deciding to go into the police academy. This is back in the 80s. Like how common was it for a woman to be, I mean, it's one thing to be an EMT, I guess, because, it's more nursing, doctor health sort of thing, but to become a police officer, was there a lot of women doing this with you?
There were more women, shall I say, than the preceding years. Like
Okay.
some of my predecessors who started in the 60s, 70s really had a pretty tough time.
I'll
Mhm.
bet.
They were referenced as matrons. They'd have to wear skirts.
Oh
And
my
I don't
God.
think policing in a skirt in a correctional facility. But
Yeah.
they really kind of broke the glass ceiling for then my generation to come through. But again, my generation
Gotcha.
coming through, there was still not a lot of women in law enforcement. There were still many areas within law enforcement that we went on to break glass ceilings also. There was a lot of
Yes.
first female ... for me in my career.
Yes.
And
Yes.
even to today, I mean, I think across the nation, about 13% of the law enforcement officers are women. In California, it's
Oh,
anywhere from like 9 to 11%. Um, so there are a lot more chiefs now that are women. So women
yes.
are actually coming through the ranks, but there's still not a lot of women in comparison to
Yeah.
other industries or that industry.
Yeah. And as Marcy pointed out, you became a chief, right? A
Yeah.
police chief. And so what was that like being 9% of the population of law enforcement? Right. I mean, was that sort of frowned upon or was it like one of those like, oh, well, we have to give women some opportunity to be in these positions? I mean, how did that come about?
Yeah, well, a lot of that, again, when I first started, my goal was to be really be a canine handler and then maybe
Oh,
a sergeant. So the ranking structure in the police department. So I've worked for a police department and sheriff's department, and the ranking structure sometimes are just a little bit different. But basically, you're an officer, a sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then chief. Or in a sheriff's department, you become the sheriff. And so there's these different structures. So you have to go through the ranks. And so my goal maybe was to be sergeant at best. I had really no desire to climb to the rank of lieutenant and captain, and then let alone, chief of police. I mean, that's kind of scary. That's That's where smart people go, right? That's where,
Other
so you
people.
think, right? That's
Yeah, yeah.
where the
Yeah,
smart
yeah.
people end up. And it just so happened that I was very fortunate in my career that I had mentors that guided me, that appreciated the work that I did, the hard work that I put in. And I put a lot of hard work in that if there's one thing I could thank my mom for, my dad for, is my work ethic.
Yeah.
I mean, they really showed me that, you put your head down and you do a good job, and you'll be recognized for it. It may take you a little longer to
Yeah.
get to wherever it is you want to go, but the right people will slide into your life that will assist you in that endeavor and recognize the skills and the strengths that you have. And again, like I said, sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get there, but I would not change that for the world, because I didn't short myself out of any kind of learning along the way.
Yeah.
And education along the way. So becoming a chief, it's a little unnerving at times, because the buck kind of stops with you in the decision
Absolutely.
making.
Yeah.
And, in law enforcement, it could be good or it could be really bad.
Mm.
And,
There's no mediocre days. Is that what you're saying? Like,
I don't care for the word routine in law enforcement. Like, you'll hear people say routine traffic stop, routine this,
Right.
routine that. There might be similar events and situations, but I don't like to use the reference in the word routine. There's business as usual on a daily basis, but you never know when it's going to go really bad.
yeah.
Mhm.
And again, when it goes really bad, you're there to answer the questions. You're there to be the sounding board of people's grief, of people's dismay or disillusionment about what they perceived law enforcement should have done
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
what
Well,
they had the
It's
capacity to do.
it's very high stakes, the job. And so absolutely, when you're in these positions that are very high stakes, I can see why you don't want to necessarily use the word routine, because things can go awry. And it's not just, we lost some money or broke some equipment. It's people's lives. And sometimes, and it's always multiple, because even if it's just one person, it's affecting a greater. So that is a huge responsibility to take on, to kind of be that. I ultimately am responsible for what those under me do, for what my team is doing, and how it comes out.
Exactly. And not only for your team, again, one of the things that you have to look at as a chief is no longer am I responsible for myself. I'm also responsible for an organization, but I take that one step further. I'm responsible for a community.
Yeah.
And if the community feels safe, if businesses feel safe,
Yeah.
investors feel safe to do business within that community that you are charged with and responsible for overall safety, whether it's perceived or real.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a lot deeper than just going to work and just being very pragmatic in this, and this, because it's not.
Yeah.
Well, this is something Marci and I are like super passionate about, and that is community. And we realize that we especially in the United States, have become so isolated. And there was something, I don't even know if you remember talking about this, but, and Marci, you haven't heard this, but part of what Rosanne would do would be to take law enforcement into the school systems. So so I don't know if it was once a month, once a quarter, you would bring law enforcement to the local schools and plug them in there, just to have them around, not to scare anyone, not to like, oh, there's the police here, but to sort of befriend the school community, right? Like, talk a little bit about why you thought that was important.
Yeah, so we had, when I was the chief of police in the community in which I was, we had an adopt a school program, and one of my predecessors had started it, but it kind of fallen off the wayside. So then when I came in as chief, that was one of my first priorities, was to meet with the superintendent and to institute that, reestablish those relationships. Because for me, in our community, we had school resource officers, and there was only like 2 of them, and we had probably, and you'll have to forgive me for the exact number, I don't recall, but at least 24 schools, anywhere from elementary, middle, and high schools in the area. that if we only have 2 school resource officers and they're assigned to high schools, so
Right.
we never get an opportunity to interact with kids during their developmental stages of growth and their perception of community, society, law enforcement, right? What they see on TV, what they see on social media, what they hear and see within their household.
Right.
And so it was important for me as a chief to find a way to get us in the school systems when it's not during the time of crisis
Right.
and not during the bad stuff.
Yeah.
And so every one of my officers on day shift and on swing shift, because obviously on graveyard, they're not, school's not in, I assigned an officer to every school. So all the elementary schools, all of the middle schools and the high schools, kind of as a force multiplier to the school resource officers, so that they would go in there and have lunch with the kids, walk around, play with the kids. That's one of the things that was very important to me when I was an officer. I would stop on the streets, take my dog out and just introduce my dog to the kids. I'd play football or basketball with them so that they could see me as a person, not as the enforcer because something bad happened in their life.
Right.
And so it was about forming relationships.
Yeah.
That was the importance behind it, so that when something did happen, there was already a relationship that was built and established. And we talk about that all the time. Trust and rapport are huge, and they are earned.
Yeah.
They're not just given to people. And just like with kids, it's building that trust and rapport ahead of time so that you create kind of a safe space as best you can. And
Right.
so that's why it was important for me to resurrect the Adopt a School program. And for as long as I know, and for this matter, it still might be in place, but I know well after I retired, it was still in place in the area in which I was the chief of police. So
Yeah.
that was
I
And
love
that
that.
trust goes both
Yeah.
ways too. So, you're getting to know the kids, they're getting to know the officer, and I feel like it can just take something that can get otherwise blown out of proportion, especially with kids, because kids are kids. Like they're doing this, and as you get into high school, they're trying things out, they're making mistakes. But if an officer already knows them, I feel like it can just take a situation that could become more antagonistic or even possibly violent and make it more like, hey, Joe or Sue or whatever this person that I know that I have a relationship with is, what's going on here? Let's talk about this, like just that de-escalation or not escalation, like stopping before it escalates to make it like you say, a community conversation where people are they're just at a different level. You're at a whole different level when you've
Well,
already got
it's the
that connection.
humanization, right, of a
Yeah.
police officer. They don't see them as another human being so many times, right? Like they're, superheroes or bad guys or whatever you want to say, but maybe they don't see them as another human being, right?
And the police officer can see the kid and know them as well. So
Yeah.
that, it goes both ways. And I feel like it's really
Yeah.
such a fundamental thing to do to make for better results, better outcomes.
Absolutely, because the uniform is a representation of authority.
Yes.
Right? And so you want to be able, like you said, to humanize the officer, right? So that when they show up, the adolescent, the child, whoever they're in that age range, sees the person,
Yes.
not just the authoritative figure in this uniform.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Oh my goodness. So, Rosie's done so many things. So we're gonna try to nail a few of these. But Rosie has taken a leadership position not only within law enforcement, but to other places. She's, an executive coach for lots of organizations. She's written books. I'm gonna go on and on and on here. But talk a little bit about some leadership skills and why you feel like leadership, like let's talk about real leadership, not some of the crazy leadership we're seeing in the world right now, but leadership on a level of really taking care of human beings. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because for me, again, coming up through the ranks, there is, God, leadership is such an umbrella term.
Yes. Yes. And
Um,
misunderstood one, by the way, like, oh, that means you have power and like all these things, right? Like it's not what most people think about leadership. And that's why I want you to speak to this.
no, I appreciate that. I mean, this is through my lens, obviously, through my formal education, my just desire to research and learn, be a continuous learner, and my doing my job and experiencing different things. And one of the things that I noticed is, again, I was rising through the ranks. I had a few instances where there was a lack of leadership, where I kind of just twisted my head and I thought, that doesn't seem right. Right. I'm not going to follow somebody blindly because they hold a rank or a title.
Mhm.
And if it seems a little off base, I'm going to ask questions.
Mhm.
And if that offends you, then I'm sorry. But, if I'm going to be the person carrying out whatever the directive or the edict is, now, granted, if it's all situational.
Right.
But I started to see different things. There was a couple sprinkles of discrimination along the way in my
Mhm.
career.
Probably more than a couple. I know,
Right.
she's smirking if you're not watching this on
Mhm.
YouTube.
There was a couple of stumbles along the way where I had to make a decision. Is this something I move forward to human resources, or is this something that I just kind of say, hey, that's a character flaw in that person, and I will take the higher road and march forward and handle my business. And I chose each time never to go to human resources and file a complaint. I chose to take the higher road, and it worked for me. Now, I'm not dissuading anybody else, and their decision is their decision, depending upon what they encounter. But it worked for me, my heart, and my soul
Mhm.
at the time. And so, as I started climbing through the ranks, um, you start dealing with more people issues, more employee issues, more
Yes.
community issues, more complaints about behavior
Mhm.
Yes.
or the perception of behavior. And it was getting to the point where I was spending more time in investigations of people's behavior that I thought, but we're not even growing leaders. We are putting people in positions, we're bringing people into jobs, we're giving a quick blurb on expectations, but we're not training or leading people. We're not teaching them. We're not giving them the skills. We're not setting
Yes.
a standard for continuous learning. We're just expecting people to know what to do. And so as I started to climb the ranks into the captain level before I became a chief, these were becoming more prevalent. And I'm thinking, I'm getting tired of dealing with all of these. I can't do my quote unquote other
Yeah.
job because I'm dealing with personnel issues or I'm dealing with community complaints. And so
Yeah.
that's when I really started to immerse myself in personal growth and leadership development.
Yeah.
And one of the things I came up with was what I call my leadership C5 model. And there's 5 things that all start with C that are very important to me. And they're kind of almost in an order. And number 1 starts with character. What do you bring to the table
Mhm.
as a human being? What is your character? What is your values? What is your philosophy?
Right.
And
And
are
a
you
lot of that has gotten lost, by the way. One of our next week's podcast actually is talking about values and character traits. I imagine most people have sort of lost sight of what that is. They probably, if you ask them, they'd stumble to give you an answer. I'm pretty sure, right? So,
right? And so character to me is key. That's number 1.
yeah.
And then competence. You have to be competent in what it is you do as a leader,
Mhm.
and competence isn't, I want to be very specific on this. Competence doesn't mean I know everything as a leader. Competence means I expose the brilliance of those who know what they need to know.
Yes.
To me, that's competence. I'm
Yeah.
not going to know everything, but I'm also going to put forth my best people or the brilliance of those who know what it is they're doing, and I'm going to cast them in a forward light. That's competence to me, is understanding that piece of it. The next one is compassion. You have to show compassion for people. You have to understand, there's that they meet people where they are.
Yes.
Terminology, and really understanding what that means. And sometimes it's hard, because if I don't know where I'm at, how am I supposed to meet you where you're at? And how am I supposed to reconcile those two things?
Yeah.
Because now I got to be compassionate for you, but I'm going through a whole bunch of stuff on my own. And so being able to, and that's where the self-awareness, right? That's where the emotional intelligence piece comes in, with to be able to self-regulate and be self-aware and matching those connections. The next one is courage. Really, the courage to say, hey, I'm doing okay. And guess what? Hey, I'm not doing okay.
Yes.
And I need you to stand in for me, because right now I'm not doing okay.
Yes.
And that's hard for people to say, especially in law enforcement. That's why wellness is so, it's been lacking for so long. It's finally within the vernacular of law enforcement right now. Thank goodness. And I'm glad that to be a part of pushing that forward and being part of the solution. And then the last for me is commitment, right? The ability to persevere through obstacles, the ability to commit to something and follow through. And it's the follow through piece of it that really embodies leadership and your influence.
Absolutely.
Say what you're going to do and follow through with it. But also, you don't have to be steadfast in your decision, because somebody might just say something where you kind of tweak your head a little bit and go, gosh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Open to change, open to hear something new, to say, oh, you know what? I thought it was this, but you make a good point, or I've changed my opinion based on this, and now we're going to do this. That's really important.
Well, I think most people listening to this are going, okay, like, who is this Rosie? Like, she doesn't sound like the average police department chief or whatever, right? You have this, as soon as you say courage, people are like, oh yeah, well, she puts on a, bulletproof vest, and she puts this on, and that's what courage is, right? So it's so interesting to me that you have really, what I would say, you're defining the feminine, and I don't want people to think that because she's a woman, but the feminine, which we are so lacking in so much of our institutions, as far as, in my opinion, right? So, which brings me to this idea of you've done all these, what appears to be very masculine sort of positions in your life, and how now you've come to change your position and put yourself into a place as a licensed marriage family counselor, right? Clearly you have learned so much about all of these things, but why then did you ultimately make the switch? Were you just so frustrated, right, that you weren't sort of breaking through with your ideas, or what made you pivot and now do have an entirely different career, essentially, right?
Yes and no. And I just want to make one thing clear. I'm not licensed yet. That takes 3,000 hours.
Oh, okay. So not quite there yet. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, not quite, but I'm an associate marriage family therapist. I've gone through the training. Now it's all the other stuff. So I don't want some people to be offended that I haven't gone through everything. So I just want to make that clear. But that aside, to me, it's all the same. It's just it's an extension, an augmentation, an extension to my career and where I've been. So again, this adds on to leadership. The wellness piece of this adds on to leadership. And that's, again, why I created trauma-informed leadership course.
Yes.
Because, part of that is, if I, as a leader, especially in law enforcement, don't recognize the impact that traumatic events have on my individual people, their families, the organization, and the community, then I'm really missing out on developing solutions that are healthy as can be. So I don't see necessarily, I hear what you're saying, and I can see where it appears to be a complete different pivot, but to me it's not. It's just an added piece to it that has really caught my attention as I have developed, again, gone through the ranks and then moved on to my second and third career.
Yes.
I love doing this. This is who I am. I mean, I'll just tell you, I got my real estate license 15 years ago with every intent of when I retired to not do anything in public safety because of the weight and the heaviness associated with it, emotionally, physically, and everything. And then when I finally retired, I had started building, and I already started my leadership development business. Yep. And I thought you could throw a dart and hit a realtor anywhere, and it's no, not being dismissive of that.
Marci's a realtor, just an FYI.
Don't throw a dart at me, please.
But a lot of people became realtors.
Yes,
and don't
absolutely true. Absolutely true.
I love looking at houses. I love doing that. Yeah. That is a lot of work. And because the field is so flooded with people, I mean, that is a lot of work. And so because I had a love and a passion for that, it didn't fill my heart. Of 35 years, I've already been immersed in public safety. Yeah. And so I finally let my license go.
Yeah, right? It's your purpose. You have to do your purpose. I mean, Marci and I are at the same place, right? We've done all these things. Marci still sells a few houses here and there, but this is what fills our cup, right? This is the stage of life where we feel like we've learned a lot, right? And now this is our opportunity to share what we've learned and hopefully make the world a little bit better place, right?
Yeah. This is the pay it forward piece.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
To be in service. I have a question, Rosie, about, we know that the police force is traditionally, as Debbie was kind of saying, is traditionally very masculine, macho, even hardcore, like, you're going to show up like this, don't be a whiner, don't cry about what happened to you, blah, blah, blah. How much resistance did you receive as you came in with these more open ideas about talking about your trauma and getting to know the community better, so that there's this more giving, taking kind of relationship where you're trusting each other, all these more it's just, they're new paradigms. It's a different way of doing it, and I believe it's a very much better, healthy way. But I'm wondering what resistance you hit, and then if people started to get it, or if it was always a struggle. How did that go?
Ironically enough, it wasn't a struggle. There were a lot of people. I mean, I've taught a lot of courses, I create content. And when I really started teaching things, I was teaching things outside of the norm in law enforcement, more on the psychological level, spiritual level. And what I was finding is people were embracing that more because it touched them on a personal level.
Oh, I love that.
And I wasn't trying to force some sort of edict onto somebody about this is how you lead. This comes really intrinsically from within, that people, the content I was teaching and the stories behind that. A lot of my coursework is not specifically about law enforcement. It's about leadership and personal growth. I just happen to have examples from law enforcement. Those are the examples I use that resonate with me. But I could teach my curriculum in any industry. And that's how I learned it, and that's why I learned it. But my examples come from my career. And so I didn't get a lot of pushback. I got a few people that sat there with their arms crossed and, the resistors.
Sure.
But I guarantee you, if you were to be honest and have an honest conversation with the resistors afterwards, they would probably say that they got something from it. But they wouldn't tell you that, because that would be being vulnerable. And being vulnerable is extremely scary.
It sure is.
If I'm vulnerable, somebody can weaponize that and use it against me and hurt me. Right. So therefore, I'm not going to expose my vulnerability to you. I'm going to stand there with my arms crossed as my shield, my protective shield from any kind of emotional pain I might have. I can handle the physical stuff, taking down a bad guy and getting bruised and all that. But boy, don't wiggle your way into my emotional stuff, because that's under lock and key.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
God forbid you mentioned spirituality. Like that's probably going in a whole different direction.
Yeah, and
You
I'm not
mentioned,
talking, we're not talking religion, we're talking spirituality,
yes.
completely, which is completely
But
different.
Marcy,
vulnerability goes right to your core principle of courage, because there is nothing more courageous than opening yourself up and talking about, like you said, I'm not doing so well right now. Or, you know what, I just went to this call and it triggered me to, a situation that happened in my childhood, or whatever it is, like opening up and saying, turns out I'm not like this giant man made of steel. I'm an actual human, and I want to deal with this that's happening, and not just stuff it down so that I explode onto my wife or my children or my family or whoever later. That's courageous, and it's hard. It's hard work, but it's so much better than the stuffing if you can
Right.
just get there.
Yeah,
so,
it's being in a safe space to say, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
hard because
yeah,
you got to find that space.
Yeah.
I want to go back to you described trauma informed leadership. So
Mhm.
Marcy and I have had some trauma informed training around social emotional learning, right? So we're coming from it or coming to it from the perspective of perhaps teaching younger, children, our youth about emotions and how to reach them in a trauma-informed way, right? So giving options. It doesn't mean you're talking about the trauma, but it's having the awareness that probably everyone on this planet has had some form of trauma. So speak to your trauma-informed leadership and what that means and how you teach people in that way.
Sure. So for me, the trauma-informed leadership piece of it. So when I was doing my research on what does that even mean, right? How do I define what that means? Because again, trauma-informed, something informed, right? That's also the kind of the new trend.
Yeah.
You put informed, but then you put the topic in front of it, right? You hyphenate
Yeah.
it and so forth.
Yeah.
And trauma-informed is one of those. And for me, I was thinking, trauma-informed leadership, as I was reading the different principles, and as I was going through my master's program to become a therapist, I had to write a lot of papers on different things and psychological um, principles and philosophies, and the trauma informed piece of it. And where I was doing my practicum was at a retreat site for specifically a trauma retreat site, intensive site for public safety members. And so that's when I
Oh,
started
wow.
thinking, I should probably, or I would like to develop some sort of course that I could
Wow.
teach leadership on that. And so during my research, I looked at the Centers for Disease Control, and they identified, and if you'll indulge me for a minute, they identified 6 basically principles or guiding principles on a trauma-informed approach.
Mm-hmm.
And safety is one of them. Safety is
Mhm.
key, right?
Yes.
People have to feel safe.
Yes.
Yes.
Again, it goes back to the vulnerability. If they are
Absolutely.
not safe, then everything else is lost.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When it comes to trauma, when it comes to treating trauma.
Yeah.
And so there's the trustworthy and the ability to be transparent. That is key too. Again, can't be transparent if you don't feel safe. You
Mhm.
can't build trust if you don't feel safety,
Right.
right? And
Yes.
then there's the peer support side of it, the colleague support, especially in leadership, are you getting support from your leaders?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there consistency there, right? Are you being treated the same way as somebody else is in your organization? And then there's the ability to collaborate with others and that mutual respect with one another, to hear each other and
Yeah.
not just listen, but to hear each other. And in hearing someone, that means truly listening to their words, taking in everything, their tone, their body language, everything that they are trying to convey, even the stuff that they're not saying. Be able to listen and hear someone without at the same time trying to formulate your response. Because while you're formulating your response and cutting them off, you didn't hear a thing they said. And so
Right.
everything that preceded that, the safety, the trust, the transparency, the collaboration, that's all gone.
Yeah.
The empowerment of someone's voice, the ability to have choice and input. And then also
Yes.
looking at cultural, historical, and gender issues. You have to put those forth. That's what society is made of,
Yes.
traditions, and
Yeah.
you may not understand or agree, but at least have the capacity to listen and try to stand in that person's shoes, even
Yes.
for a moment.
I think you just summed up what is going on the planet right now. If we could just,
And how to make it better.
yeah, if we could just listen and listen as if you were trauma informed, as if you had training in this, but really it just gets really simple, right? It's back to the
Right.
basics of trust and listening and supporting and,
Respecting people, showing them kindness, letting them tell you how it is for them instead of you trying to tell them how it is for them.
Right.
Yeah, it's really elemental. It's lovely. It's what we need. And I don't know why. I don't know why it's controversial. I don't know why there's not more of it, but I'm glad that you're teaching, and I'm glad that there are people out there seeking to bring it, because this is what we need.
Well, I think people are fighting to be heard and to be appreciated and respected. Everybody's fighting and jockeying for their place in their world, in the world. And I would liken this to social media, right? With social media, I have an excellent example. So in my past, I hosted 2 foreign exchange students, one from
I
Spain
remember this.
and one from Thailand.
Yes, I remember.
And we had taken them on a cruise, to a short little cruise. And on that cruise, there was a influencer on there that was their age range. And this particular influencer had their entourage of people floating behind them and on the boat. And, my partner at the time, my wife at the time, and we didn't know who this person was, and nor did I really care.
Yeah.
But the 2 foreign exchange students, this was important in their life.
Yeah.
And so they showed us the TikTok post from this individual, and this person had a background of the island of Catalina on there, and basically saying on daddy's boat, in the Caribbean or the Caribbean or whatever. And we're thinking, no, you're not. Catalina Island, you're with the rest of us on this cruise ship here.
Right.
But it was such an eye-opener for the girls, because had they not been on the same ship with this person, and then seeing that post, they would have thought that this person was on, daddy's boat. That became the inside joke, on daddy's boat, rich and all of this stuff, living this life.
Yeah.
And so I think there's always this FOMO, right? This fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Well, it's the concept of the avatar, right? Like,
Right.
isn't that what they're all like? Oh, no, nobody really knows, anything that's real anymore, because all they see is this avatar, right? And back to what you said, they're using the avatar because they think that's the only way they can be heard, or that someone will pay attention to them, right? As if they act as if they're on daddy's boat, right?
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And so, that was, it was beautiful to watch that unfold. It truly was such a teaching and learning lesson for those girls to see that, because there are girls from, again, Spain and Thailand coming to America, to interact with teenage girls in high school. And
that's tough.
That's tough in and of itself, right?
Yes.
And so to have that learning lesson, it was beautiful just to watch, and then to have a discussion about that facade, basically.
Yeah.
And being authentic.
Yeah.
And what authenticity truly gets you, rather than chasing, again, this fear of missing out, which more times than not is such an illusion. Because when people post on Facebook, that might be a moment in time where you're having a good time, but we all know that's not real life. Real life is hitting the grind every day.
Yeah. Well, we all know, but do we all know? Right?
Okay, well, I said
Right.
that's a great
Right?
point.
Yes.
Great
Right?
point.
Like
We all know,
We
but we
need
don't.
reminders. Yeah, we need
But do
Yeah.
reminders.
we? That is
Yes.
true.
Yeah.
And so, for me, the trauma-informed leadership piece of it, basically, the way I define it is basically creating an understanding of how trauma it impacts individuals, it impacts the organization, and how it impacts the community. So, on an individual basis, how does it impact your family and friends, your personal life, right?
Yeah.
On an organizational, how does it impact your colleagues, that the temperament for the organization?
Yeah.
When people come in there, and then for the communities, right? How does that impact the communities and the perception of what your organization is there to do?
Yeah.
And it, case in point, in this one area where I was the chief of police, we had a major explosion, gas leak explosion that killed one, leveled the house, and shook a community.
Mhm.
Talk about having a trauma-informed approach,
Yeah.
because you had the officers that were dealing with it, because one of the individuals that died in that just happened to be the father of one of our employees,
Oh my
right?
goodness.
So there was a nexus to the organization there. There was the community, the immediate community was suffering from this, and then all of a sudden you had the rest of the community doing drive-bys just to see what it looked like.
Yeah.
Right. And then you had, how do you deal with this? This is now a national news event.
Right.
And so there were so many things that were occurring during that time that, I'll be honest with you, I think I handled it fairly well. But boy, now knowing that what I have experience wise and what I have knowledge wise, I wish I'd have had the knowledge I
Yes.
have now to engage in that event back then.
Yeah.
But again, it was a learning,
Yeah.
Right.
I am so afraid that we're running out of time. I could talk to you all day, Rosie. And I'm feeling inspired. I really am feeling inspired. We see so much negativity around, public safety and what's going on in the world, and then those on the back end who've worked in public safety and what they've gone through. And I'm grateful for you, and I'm sure you're training a whole generation of other people in law enforcement to be more like you, and to be open and to be informed. And there's this whole other piece on social justice, which I'm sure Marci is more of an expert on than I, but I think we'd love to have you back and have more conversation about that probably.
Sure. I would love to come back, and there is one thing that I would like to say under the gratitude piece of this, right? Because I don't like to get into the negative side of it, is, I like to start some of my classes out with, tell me something good.
Yes.
Tell me
Yes.
something good that has happened, is occurring, or you think will occur in the future, right? Because we need to rewire our brains to think that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a fire and rewire type of thing. So tell me
Yes.
something good.
Yes.
And so that's important to me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think you're something good that happened on the podcast today.
I appreciate that. And it was nice. I'm glad you reached out
Yeah.
and to reconnect.
And Marci is going to want to ask you, how do people find you?
Yeah, like your podcast, Resurgent You. Where will
your
they
books?
find that?
So they can find that on Spotify.
Okay.
Resurgent You. It's a 17 episode limited series leadership
Great.
podcast. It's not a live podcast. It's recorded. And again, it's a 17 episode series on leadership. You can find me through the richealgroup.com. I have an email. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
And Richeal,
books?
Richeal.
Yes. And the books will be posted up on Amazon. I do have one posted up there now. It's called what is it called? It's called Prepping to Promote. I had to think, or 25 Nuggets of Wisdom. I had to think for a second. And then the other 3 books are in editing, and 2 of them are for editing and republishing. They've already gone out, published once, but I made some revisions to them. So they will be coming soon on Amazon also.
You're a busy girl. Thank you, Rosie. We'll see
Thank
you
you
again
so much.
soon.
Great
Hopefully.
to talk to you.
And now for your core mental health break. This is your opportunity to take a moment to support your mental wellness, your peace of mind, your ease and grace. Our Core Tools platform consists of a number of proven tools and techniques that are designed to reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, in spite of whatever's going on in your world. We suggest you schedule a mental health break every day. It doesn't have to be elaborate or time-consuming. Set your alarm to take a deep breath a few times a day. You deserve it, and it matters. Today, let's try some sound healing by means of this binaural music. Put on your headphones if you can. Take a breath. Relax. Maybe close your eyes and just listen. Thank you for pausing for yourself today. Your mental health is important, and you deserve peace, calm, and ease in your life every day. So please choose to receive it. It is always available right at your center, your heart, your core. Stay well, friends. Thanks for listening to the Warrior Parent Podcast, which is a production of our nonprofit, Cour Experience, who also creates and distributes Cour tools. You can find us at courexperience.org. Make sure you join us next week for another informative conversation to help you and your family show up mindfully, purposefully, and joyfully with each other and in your community.
Our Core Tools platform consists of a number of proven tools and techniques that are designed to reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm in spite of what's going on in your world. We want to thank Samuel Hale, LLC, for sponsoring this podcast. Technical and marketing support comes from Inspire Your Brand. Our podcast editor is Justin Beeden. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, the producers, or the financial supporters. I'm Debbie DiManno.
And I'm Marci Mitchell. Thanks for listening. If you resonate with the idea of creating a community to help support kids and families, won't you join us by following the podcast and sharing this episode? You can even write a review. It truly does take a village, and we appreciate you.